Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku ruled Atlantis in Aquaman's place. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The rain fell on Kamino War not with the gentle persistence of a spring shower, but with the cold, driving fury of a city that had already wept too much. It slicked the asphalt, catching the lurid neons of the half-rebuilt district, and turning the streets into fractured mirrors of a world struggling to heal. Tonight those streets were a battlefield once more. Izuku Midoriya, known to the world as the hero Deku, moved like a bolt of green lightning through the downpour. Water streamed from the points of his masks, ears, and his costume, a darker, more durable gamma suit, was plastered to his frame. He was 17 now, a second year at UA High, and the raw, bone-shattering power of One for All had been tempered into a fine, sharp edge. He hummed with it, a constant 45% output that wreathed him in emerald sparks, a living storm of heroic potential. Todoroki, left flank! He's trying to open another one near the overpass. Izuku's voice, amplified by his mask's calm, was crisp and commanding, a far cry from the stammering boy he'd once been. A wall of ice, gleaming and immense, erupted from the ground, blocking the villain's path. Shoto Todoroki stood atop it, his bicolored hair stark against the stormy sky, one side frosting with cold, the other letting off faint wisps of steam. He's contained. For now. His quirk is getting more unstable. Below, the source of their trouble, a man calling himself Rupture, was laughing, a wild, unhinged sound that barely carried over the storm. His quirk was a terrifying thing. He could tear holes in the fabric of reality. They weren't clean portals, not like Kuroji's. They were ragged, shimmering wounds in space, edged with a sickly violet light that warped the air around them. Looking into one was like staring into a kaleidoscope of broken physics. Buildings bent, colors bled, and the rain fell upwards. Containment is not a victory, Todoroki! Tenya Ida's voice boomed, his recipro burst propelling him in a silver-blue arc to evacuate a handful of civilians cowering in a bus stop. We must apprehend him before he causes a catastrophic spatial collapse. Izuku landed silently on a rooftop overlooking the scene. Danger sense, a low thrum at the base of his skull, spiked erratically. It wasn't a single, focused warning of an incoming attack. It was a chaotic, staticky mess, a reflection of Rupture's quirk. The very air was a threat. He scanned the area, his mind racing, muttering under his breath. Quirk is reality warping, short range, line of sight activation. The portals are decaying almost as fast as he creates them. He's not controlling them, he's just breaking things. Deku, what's the plan? Achiko Uraraka's voice came through, warm and steady. She was floating nearby, using her quirk on chunks of debris Rupture's portals had spat out, preventing them from crushing anything below. He's getting desperate. The rifts are getting bigger. Izuku's eyes narrowed. He saw it then. Rupture wasn't aiming for them. He was aiming for the foundations of the buildings, the sewer lines, the power conduits. He wasn't a conqueror. He was a vandal on a cosmic scale. And in his frenzy, he hadn't noticed the small figure huddled in the doorway of a ramen shop he was about to bring down, a little girl, no older than 7, clutching a drenched cat plushie. Danger sense screamed. Not static. A sharp, piercing shriek. Rupture's hands clawed at the air in front of the ramen shop. A new tier began to form, this one larger than the rest, a swirling vortex of impossible geometry. It wasn't just tearing a hole, it was pulling the building in. Concrete groaned, glass shattered, and rebar bent with agonizing shrieks. There was no time for a plan. No time for words. Izuku pushed off the rooftop. Float activated, a secondary lift that turned his 45% leap into a controlled, silent flight. He shot across the street, a green comet against the bruised purple sky. Black whip, tendrils of pure energy, erupted from his back and arms, not to attack, but to anchor. They lashed out, wrapping around a sturdy light pole and a concrete traffic barrier, allowing him to perform an impossible mid-air course correction. He hit the street in a controlled slide, the soles of his iron-reinforced boots carving grooves in the wet asphalt. He was a blur of motion, scooping the terrified little girl into his arms just as the reality-warping rift imploded. The world dissolved into a silent, deafening roar. The ramen shop didn't collapse. It folded in on itself, twisted like a wet rag, and was devoured by the shimmering void. The portal, now unstable and bloated, began to swell, sucking in rain, debris, and air with a hungry, howling vacuum. "I've got you!" Izuku whispered to the child, shielding her face with his body. He turned to leap away, to get her to Ida, but his foot snagged on a piece of warped rebar jutting from the ground at an unnatural angle. He stumbled, a single, fatal moment of imbalance. From across the street, his friends could only watch in horror. "Deku!" Uraraka screamed, her voice raw with terror. The villain, Rupture, cackled, his eyes wide with maniacal glee. With a final, convulsive gesture, he thrust his hands forward. "Let's see a hero save anyone from nothingness!" He wasn't aiming for Izuku. He was aiming for the portal itself. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The unstable vortex, already collapsing, now did so with the force of a detonating bomb. But it wasn't an explosion of matter, it was an implosion of reality. The shimmering violet energy contracted violently, converging on the one point of stability within its chaotic field, Izuku Midoriya. Izuku felt it a split second before he saw it. Danger sense wasn't a scream anymore. It was a flat line. A profound and absolute silence that was more terrifying than any noise. He had just enough time to do one last thing. With a desperate surge of strength, he threw the little girl, a gentle but firm arc that sent her tumbling safely towards Ida's rapidly approaching form. He locked eyes with Uraraka for a fraction of a second. He saw her panicked face, her wide eyes reflecting the terrifying violet light. He tried to smile, a gesture of reassurance he didn't feel. Then the world ended. To his friends, it was as if he had been erased from existence. One moment, the hero Deku was there, a bastion of green light and hope. The next, the violet energy of the collapsed portal flared into an unbearable, silent nova, and when it vanished, so did he. There was no body, no blood, not even a scrap of his costume. The rebar he had tripped on was gone. A perfect, clean circle of asphalt was simply missing. The rain fell into the shallow crater, hissing softly. For a long, terrible moment, there was only the sound of the storm. Then, Uraraka's scream tore through the night, a sound of such profound, soul-shattering grief that it made the entire world seem to stop. Ida, who had caught the child, stood frozen, his disciplined form rigid with a horror that went beyond words. Todoroki, from his pillar of ice, felt a cold dread snake into his heart, a chill that had nothing to do with his quirk. His left side flared instinctively, fire melting ice in a torrent of steaming water, a physical manifestation of his raging, helpless grief. Izuku Midoriya was gone, but he was not dead. Death would have been a mercy. There was no transition, no tunnel of light, no sense of movement. There was only a wrenching, tearing sensation, as if every atom in his body was being simultaneously pulled apart and crushed together. One for all roared within him, a chaotic symphony of 8 voices screaming in protest as the fundamental laws that governed their existence were rewritten. And then, there was pressure. It was an absolute, all-encompassing force that defied comprehension. It wasn't like being held down. It was like being the very concept of down. He felt it in his bones, which creaked and threatened to splinter. He felt it in his organs, which felt compressed to the size of marbles. He felt it in his blood, which felt thick and syrupy in his veins, and he was drowning. His lungs were on fire, screaming for air that wasn't there. He had instinctively held his breath, but that was a conscious act, and consciousness was a luxury he was rapidly losing. The cold was a living thing, an abyssal chill that leached the warmth from him instantly, seeping past his costume and into his very marrow. It was dark. A profound, starless, lightless dark that his eyes, no matter how wide he strained them, could not penetrate. Danger sense was a continuous, high-frequency siren in his mind, a signal of pure, undiluted peril coming from every direction at once. The threat was the water. The threat was the pressure. The threat was the cold. The threat was the dark. The threat was existence itself in this place. Mom. All Might. Everyone. His mind, fragmenting under the strain, latched onto images of his loved ones. Their faces, twisted in grief, flashed behind his eyes. He had failed. He had been erased. He had left them. The thought was more painful than the pressure, colder than the abyss. His grip on consciousness slipped. The desperate need for air became an involuntary, biological command he could no longer fight. His mouth opened, and the crushing, frigid water of the deep ocean rushed in. It was a feeling of such violation, such ultimate defeat, that it shocked a spark of defiance back into his soul. No, the thought was not his own. It was a chorus, the voices of the vestiges of one for all, a unified roar of refusal. Not like this. His survival instinct, honed by 100 battles and fueled by the world's greatest power, took over. He wasn't thinking about form or technique. He wasn't thinking about percentages. He was a drowning animal, and he needed to go up. He drew his limbs in, coiling his body against the crushing resistance of the water. He could feel the power of one for all gathering, a desperate, frantic concentration of energy in his limbs. It crackled around him, the familiar green sparks momentarily illuminating a terrifying, featureless void of black water. With a final, silent scream that was felt more than heard, he unleashed it. Detroit smash! The punch wasn't aimed at anything. It was pure propulsion. Underwater, the effect was cataclysmic. A massive cavitation bubble, a pocket of near vacuum, formed around his fist for a microsecond before collapsing with the force of an underwater explosion. The shockwave ripped through the water, a silent thunderclap that would have pulped a normal man. The force propelled him upwards at an incredible velocity, a human torpedo against the weight of an entire ocean, but the ocean was relentless. The water resistance was like punching through wet concrete. His momentum, so explosive at first, began to bleed away almost immediately. He had bought himself maybe 100 feet of altitude, a meaningless distance in this crushing depth. The effort had cost him dearly. The bones in his arms screamed in protest, and the last of his oxygen was violently expelled. Black spots danced in his vision. The siren of danger sense faded to a dull, distant moan. This was it. He was going to die. Alone, in the dark, at the bottom of a world he didn't know. But something was wrong. Or rather, something was different. The reality-warping energy of Rupture's quirk had not simply transported him. It had been a catalyst. In that instant of transit between worlds, that chaotic storm of broken physics, his body had been drenched in energies that unmade and remade. That energy, now woven into his very DNA, was reacting to the lethal environment. It had one simple directive, imprinted upon it by its last interaction with Izilka's biology: survive. A strange warmth spread through his chest, pushing back against the abyssal cold. It felt like One for All, but different. Greener. Wilder. Tendrils of emerald light, visible even in the total darkness, began to snake across his skin, tracing the lines of his circulatory system. They were rewriting him. The process was agonizing. It felt like every cell in his body was being simultaneously ignited and drowned. The water in his lungs, the instrument of his death, suddenly became something else. His gills, a long dormant branch on the evolutionary tree, were being brutally and artificially forced into existence, adapted from the structure of his lungs. He gave a convulsive, full-body spasm, and then he did something impossible. He breathed. The inhalation was a shock, a jarring, alien sensation. It wasn't air. It was thick, cold, and tasted of salt and ancient, primordial life. But it was oxygen. His body, in its new, impossible state, could extract it directly from the water. The fire in his lungs subsided, replaced by a strange, rhythmic coolness. The pressure began to recede. Not because he was rising, but because his body was adapting. His bone density increased exponentially. His flesh and muscle grew tougher, more resilient. His eardrums, which should have burst 1,000 times over, now registered the immense pressure as a mere background hum. His vision cleared. His pupils dilated to an inhuman degree, and his retinas shifted, becoming sensitive to the faintest traces of bioluminescence. The absolute black gave way to a world of deep, deep blue, populated by faint, ghostly lights of creatures that lived and died without ever seeing the sun. He was alive. He was breathing water. He was withstanding the pressure of the abyss. He was also weak, disoriented, and utterly, terrifyingly lost. The remnants of one for all flickered faintly within him, exhausted. He was adrift, a speck of impossible life in an endless, hostile wilderness. Far below him, on the sunless seafloor, a Manta-class submersible cut silently through the water. It was a piece of technology so advanced it would have been considered science fiction on the surface. Sleek and black, shaped like the creature it was named for, it moved with a silent, electromagnetic propulsion system that left no wake. Inside, Commander Merc stood before the main viewport, his arms crossed over his silver, ornate armor. His face, grim and weathered, was illuminated by the soft, blue glow of the console displays. He was a veteran of 100 patrols in the border territories, a man who had seen everything the deep ocean had to throw at Atlantis. He had seen trench migrations, rogue leviathans, and the bizarre, glowing detritus that sometimes sank down from the dry world. He was not easily surprised. "Report," he said, his voice a low baritone. "Massive energy spike detected at these coordinates, Commander." The pilot reported, his fingers flying across a holographic interface. "Unprecedented signature. Not seismic, not volcanic. It had the characteristics of a directed shockwave. All deep trench sensors registered it. Source? Unknown. The energy reading is strange. It flared for less than a second and then vanished. But there's a residual bioluminescence. Faint but odd. It has the same energy signature." Merc's eyes narrowed. "Take us in. Silent running. I want to see what can create a pressure wave that strong." The Manta sub ascended slowly, its external sensors sweeping the water column. For several minutes, there was nothing but the usual abyssal life, anglerfish with their dangling lures, ghostly jellyfish pulsing with cold light, and the occasional colossal squid drifting in the dark. "There, Commander," the sensor operator said, his voice laced with disbelief. "Bearing 309er. It's a life form. Small. Surface dweller physiology, but that can't be right." The pressure would have turned it to paste. Merc strode over to the sensor station and looked at the readings. The operator was right. The biosigns were completely wrong for this depth. The heat signature was that of a warm-blooded mammal. The density was all wrong. And yet there it was. Alive. "On screen," Merc commanded. The main viewport zoomed in, its light amplification systems turning the deep blue into a grainy, ghostly gray. At first, it was just a smudge, a vaguely humanoid shape drifting listlessly in the current. As they drew closer, details emerged. It was a boy. A surface dweller, clad in a strange, dark green suit that was torn and ragged in places. He had a wild mane of green-black hair that floated around his head like a dark halo. His face was pale, his eyes were closed, but the faint, rhythmic movement of his chest confirmed the impossible. He was breathing, and he was glowing. A soft, gentle emerald aura pulsed from his body, the same energy their sensors had detected. The crew of the Manta sub stared in stunned silence. They had encountered sunken surface ships, seen the corpses of whales and sharks. They had never seen anything like this, a living, breathing surface dweller, alone, in the crushing dark of the abyss. It was a violation of every known law of biology. "He's an anomaly," Merc breathed, his professional curiosity overriding his soldier's caution. "He shouldn't exist." "What are your orders, Commander?" the pilot asked, his voice hushed with awe. Merc was silent for a moment, his mind weighing the possibilities. This boy could be a weapon, a scout, a biological freak of nature. Or he could be something else entirely. Whatever the case, he could not be left here. An anomaly this profound had to be brought before the Royal Science Academy, and perhaps, before the king himself. "Prepare the stasis field. We're bringing him in. Gently. I want him alive and unharmed. Let's see what secrets the dry world has sent us." Izuku was floating in a dream of green light and silent screams. He saw flashes of his life, his mother's smile, All Might's booming laugh, the determined faces of his friends. He saw the violet horror of the portal and felt the crushing weight of the ocean. It all swirled together in a disjointed, feverish haze. He was so tired. It would be so easy to just let go, to drift away into the endless blue. He was roused by a strange sensation. A tingling warmth spread over his body, a stark contrast to the unending cold. He felt himself being gently but inexorably pulled, as if caught in a current with no source. He forced his heavy eyelids to open. His first clear sight in this new world was of a machine. It was black and sleek, shaped like a ray, with two glowing, blue-white orbs for eyes. It hovered silently in front of him, and from it emanated a cone of shimmering, pale blue energy that had enveloped him. He was being captured. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through his exhaustion. He tried to fight, to summon one for all, but it was like trying to draw water from a dry well. There was nothing there but a faint, residual warmth. His body, pushed so far beyond its limits, refused to obey. He couldn't even lift a finger. He saw figures moving behind the machine's dark, crystalline viewport. They were humanoid, but taller, leaner. They wore gleaming, silvery armor that seemed to be crafted to mimic the scales of a fish. He couldn't make out their faces, but he could feel their collective gaze on him, a mixture of caution and intense curiosity. His consciousness began to fade again, the effort of staying awake too much. The last thing he saw before the darkness reclaimed him was the mantis sub turning, pulling him along in its gentle, inescapable tractor beam, and leading him deeper into the unknown. When he awoke again, it was to the sight of light, not the faint, ghostly light of the abyss, but brilliant, vibrant light. He was inside the mantis sub now, lying on a metal slab, still held in the soft glow of the stasis field. He could see out of the main viewport, and what he saw stole the breath he was now so unnaturally able to take. They were approaching a barrier. It was a vast, shimmering dome of golden energy, so large it seemed to stretch to the limits of his vision. It held back the crushing dark of the ocean, a perfect bubble of safety on the seafloor. As they passed through it, the sensation was like breaking the surface of water into air, a subtle shift in pressure and temperature. And then he saw it, Atlantis. It was not a city of sunken Greek columns and Roman architecture, as the myths of his world described. It was a living, breathing metropolis of impossible beauty. Towers of pearlescent coral, sculpted by generations of hydrokinetic artists, spiraled towards the sky, the shimmering energy dome far above. The buildings were not static. They pulsed with soft, internal light, bioluminescence woven into their very structure. Bridges of solidified, glowing water arched between the towers, with sleek, fish-like vehicles gliding along them. The city was lit by massive, glowing crystals that hung in the water like captive stars, and by vast gardens of phosphorescent flora that carpeted the plazas and balconies, casting everything in a soft, ethereal glow of blue, green, and gold. Citizens, Atlanteans, swam through the open water between buildings with the grace of dolphins, their bodies sleek and powerful, their armor and clothing shimmering like a school of exotic fish. Colossal, tamed sea turtles, their shells adorned with glowing structures, served as slow-moving public transport, while schools of tiny, glittering fish moved through the streets like flocks of birds. The scale of it was breathtaking. The beauty was overwhelming. Izuku stared, his mind, already reeling from the trauma of his arrival, unable to process the sheer, alien majesty of it all. He had dreamed of being a hero, of saving people with a smile. He had trained, fought, and bled for a world he understood. But this was not his world. This was something else. A place of deep, profound, and terrible wonder. The awe that filled his heart was quickly chased away by a cold, crushing wave of despair. The beauty of the city only served to highlight his own isolation. Every glowing tower, every graceful swimmer, was a reminder that he was impossibly, irrevocably far from home. His mother, his friends, all might. They thought he was dead. He might as well be. Tears welled in his eyes, mixing with the water that now sustained him. He was alive. He was a survivor. But as the mantis sub glided towards the central spire of the magnificent, impossible city, Izuku Midoriya had never felt more like he was drowning. Consciousness returned to Izuku Midoriya not as a gentle dawn, but as a series of disconnected, jarring sensations. The first was the absence of pressure. The soul-crushing weight of the abyss was gone, replaced by a neutral buoyancy that felt unnervingly alien. The second was the light. It was a soft, pervasive blue, filtering through his eyelids and painting the inside of his mind with the color of a forgotten sky. The third, and most disorienting, was the rhythmic, cool flow of water through his lungs. Each breath was a silent, liquid miracle that served as a constant reminder of his fundamental transformation. He forced his eyes open. He was in a large, circular room, the walls of which were a seamless, polished material that resembled mother-of-pearl. The blue light emanated from the walls themselves, a soft, biological glow. He was floating in the center of the chamber, held perfectly still by an invisible force, his limbs slightly outstretched. He was no longer in his tattered hero costume. It was gone, replaced by simple, dark gray trousers made of a smooth, slick fabric he didn't recognize. His upper body was bare, allowing him to see the faint, emerald traces of light that still pulsed beneath his skin, a visible echo of the power that had saved and remade him. Panic, a familiar, cold companion, began to prickle at the edges of his mind. He was a specimen in a jar. He tried to move, to summon the crackling power of One for All, but his body felt sluggish and weak, his connection to the quirk a distant, faint ember. The stasis field, or whatever held him, was an effective cage. Where am I? What do they want? The questions spiraled in his head, each one feeding a growing sense of dread. He thought of his mother, picturing her face when she heard the news. He saw All Might's hollowed cheeks, Uraraka's tear-streaked face, Ida's rigid, devastated posture. The grief was a physical blow, a weight far heavier than any ocean. They thought he was dead. He had died to them. The magnificent, impossible city he had seen was not a wonder. It was his tomb. A section of the pearlescent wall shimmered and became transparent, revealing an observation deck beyond. Figures stood there, their silhouettes dark against the city's light. They were watching him, studying him. He was an exhibit. The surface world anomaly. 4 days, or what he perceived as days in the timeless, constant light. This was his reality. Periodically, sleek, silent drones would glide into the chamber, scanning him with beams of colored light that made his skin tingle. They took samples of his blood, which was still red but now carried a strange, luminescent quality in the water. They analyzed his tissue, his bone density, his impossible respiratory system. Through it all, he remained a passive, silent observer of his own captivity, trapped in a cycle of grief, fear, and profound loneliness. He was a hero with no one to save, not even himself. It was during one of these periods of bleak introspection that a new figure entered the observation deck. He was older than the others Izuku had seen, with a trimmed, graying beard and lines of deep thought etched around his eyes. He wore not the silver armor of the soldiers who had found him, but flowing robes of deep blue and silver that swirled around him in the water. His movements were slow, deliberate, and his gaze was not one of simple curiosity. It was one of intense, scholarly fascination. He looked at Izuku not as a creature, but as the answer to a question he had yet to formulate. This was Nudis Vulko, chief advisor to the throne and head of the Royal Science Academy. For the past cycle, he had been poring over the data from the strange being they had pulled from the unfathomed trench. The boy's biology was a paradox. His cellular structure was undeniably that of a surface dweller, a Homo sapiens, yet it had been violently and crudely adapted for abyssal survival. He possessed a lung-gill hybrid system that was an evolutionary impossibility. His musculoskeletal system had been reinforced to a degree that defied all known biological principles. But most fascinating of all was the energy signature. An internal power source of unimaginable potential, an energy that seemed to break the laws of thermodynamics. It was this that had kept the boy from being torn apart during his transdimensional arrival, and it was this that Vulko believed was the key to understanding him. He swam from the observation deck to the chamber's entrance. The pearlescent wall dissolved into a curtain of shimmering water for a moment, allowing him to pass through. He glided to a halt a respectful distance from Izuku, his presence calm and non-threatening. "Greetings," Vulko said. His voice was not sound as Izuku knew it, but a series of complex, modulated clicks and vibrations that vibrated through the water. The meaning was utterly lost on Izuku. Izuku just stared, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and defiance. He tried to speak, but the water in his lungs made it impossible. Only a stream of bubbles escaped his lips. Vulko gave a patient, understanding smile. He raised a hand, on which he wore a silver gauntlet. He tapped a crystal set into the back of it. A low hum filled the water, and when he spoke again, the sound was different. It was still layered with the clicks of his native tongue, but underneath it, a strange, synthesized voice echoed directly in Izuku's mind, a voice that was learning and adapting with every passing millisecond. Testing. Auditory, mental, translation. Can you understand? The synthesized voice was halting, the grammar fractured, but the words were Japanese. Izuku's eyes widened in shock. Hope, a feeling so alien it was almost painful, bloomed in his chest. He nodded vigorously, a desperate, jerky motion. Good. The psychic frequency of your species is noisy. Complicated. Vulko observed him for a long moment. My name is Vulko. I am a scholar. A scientist. You are in the city of Atlantis. You are safe. Safe? Izuku thought, the irony a bitter taste in his mouth. I'm a prisoner. As if hearing his thoughts, Vulko's expression softened. You are not a prisoner. You are a guest. An unprecedented, and highly confusing, guest. We mean you no harm. We seek only to understand. Where? Izuku tried to force the word out, the effort creating a garbled rush of bubbles. You are wondering where you are, Vulko's voice translated, anticipating his question. You are deep in the Atlantic Ocean. By my estimations, nearly 7 miles beneath the surface your people walk upon. 7 miles? The number was so immense it was meaningless. He was further from home than any human in history. The faint hope that had sparked within him guttered and died. The energy that brought you here, Vulko continued, his scholarly curiosity overriding any sense of tact, it has rewritten you. To survive a spontaneous materialization at this depth, it is a miracle. A terrifying, beautiful miracle. And the power within you, it is like nothing I have ever seen. It feels old. Like the echo of a choir, all singing a single, deafening note. Izuku stared at him. He knew Vulko was talking about one for all. The vestiges. The ghosts of the past users. This Atlantean could somehow sense them. What is it? Vulko asked, his voice in the mind leaning forward with an almost childlike eagerness. What is this power you carry? And so, haltingly, Izuku began to explain. Through gestures and focused thought, which the translator seemed to pick up on, he described his world. He spoke of a society where 80% of the population was born with unique abilities, quirks. He described his own, one for all, a sacred torch passed from one generation to the next, a stockpile of immense power. To Vulko, it sounded like the stuff of myth and legend, a fairy tale from the dry world. But the proof was floating right in front of him. This boy, this Izuku Midoriya, as he learned his name was a living legend. In the following cycles, Vulko became Izuku's sole link to this new reality. The stasis field was deactivated, allowing Izuku to swim freely within the chamber, though the exit remained sealed. Vulko became his teacher. He taught Izuku the Atlantean language, a fluid, melodic tongue that was as much about posture and gesture as it was about sound. He brought him historical scrolls made of preserved kelp paper and holographic star charts that showed a view of the cosmos from the bottom of the sea. Izuku, in turn, was a ferociously quick study. His analytical mind, the same mind that could deconstruct a hero's quirk in minutes, soaked up the new language, the new culture, the new physics of his environment. He learned that Atlantis was the heart of a global undersea civilization, one of 7 kingdoms that had survived when the continent sank beneath the waves thousands of years ago. Through these lessons, a strange sort of friendship formed. Vulko saw in Izuku not a threat, but a spirit of astonishing purity and resilience. The boy's grief for his lost world was palpable, but it wasn't tainted by bitterness or a desire for revenge. It was a clean, sharp sorrow. And beneath it, the core of the hero remained. You speak of heroes as a profession, Vulko said one day, the translator device now unnecessary as Izuku was becoming conversational in Atlantean. A societal role. Here, the word hero is reserved for figures of history. King Atlan, our first and greatest king. Warriors who died in the great wars. It is a title for the dead. Where I come from, it's a job for the living. Izuku replied, his voice still strange to his own ears, a lower, more resonant tone adapted to the dense water. It means protecting people, putting others before yourself. That's all it means. It was during this conversation that Vulko's expression grew grim. He decided it was time for Izuku to understand the reality of the world he had fallen into. "That is a noble sentiment, Izuku Midoriya," Vulko said quietly. "But I fear it is not one shared by our current king." He told Izuku about King Orem, half-brother to a surface-dweller prince named Arthur Curry, who had rejected the throne. Orem was a charismatic, powerful, and deeply ambitious ruler. He was a traditionalist who saw the surface world, the dry world, as a source of pollution, corruption, and sacrilege. For years, their waste, their chemicals, their sunken ships had poisoned the oceans. Orem used this real grievance to stoke the fires of war. "He is unifying the kingdoms," Vulko explained, his voice low. "He is building the largest army in the history of Atlantis. He intends to declare war on the surface. A war of annihilation. He calls it the ocean's reckoning. Izuku felt a chill that had nothing to do with the water temperature. A war between the surface and the sea? The devastation would be unimaginable. Millions, perhaps billions, would die. "You have to stop him," Izuku said, the hero in him flaring to life. "I am but an advisor." Vulko sighed, a stream of weary bubbles escaping his lips. "I can counsel the king, but I cannot command him. He sees my pleas for diplomacy as weakness. He believes the surface world is weak, chaotic, and unworthy of respect. A world of brutes." It was at that moment, as if summoned by the very sentiment, that the chamber's entrance dissolved without warning. A figure of immense presence glided into the room, flanked by 2 royal guards in magnificent, shark-themed armor. She was tall and regal, with a cascade of fiery red hair that floated around her like a living flame in the water. Her eyes were the color of the sea after a storm, and her features were sharp and beautiful, set in a mask of haughty disdain. She wore armor of shimmering emerald scales that clung to her like a second skin, and at her hip was a coiled, whip-like belt. This was Princess Mera of Zebel, daughter of King Nereus, and betrothed to King Orem. Her piercing gaze fell upon Izuku, and it was filled with an immediate and undisguised contempt. "So this is it," she said, her voice a clear, commanding tone that needed no amplification. "The creature from the dry world. Vulko, you have been spending your time coddling a pollutant." "Princess Mera," Vulko said, bowing his head respectfully. "He is our guest. A scientific marvel. He is an omen," Mera countered, swimming closer to Izuku, circling him like a predator. "The surface poisons our water, kills our reefs, and slaughters our brethren. Now it sends us its monsters. Tell me, creature, did you come to spy? To scout our defenses before your people finish the job of destroying our world?" Izuku felt his own anger rise. She was judging his entire world, billions of people, based on the actions of a few. But he saw the genuine pain in her eyes. It wasn't just arrogance. It was a fierce, protective love for her home. He saw a mirror of his own feelings. My world didn't send me," Izuku said in his still-developing Atlantean. "It was an accident. And my world isn't a monster. There are good people there. People who want to help others." Mera scoffed, a sharp, unladylike sound. "Your good people are a myth. You are a race of destroyers. You know nothing of balance. You only know how to take." She stopped in front of him, her face inches from his. "I have seen what your kind does. I am not impressed by your words." With a flick of her wrist, the water between them warped. It solidified, hardening into a crystalline spear, its point aimed directly at Izuku's heart. "Princess, no!" Vulko cried out, moving to intervene. "Stay out of this, Vulko," Mera commanded without looking at him. "I wish to see the strength of this surface dweller. Let's see if his might matches his mouth." The spear shot forward. Izuku's training took over. Danger sense, which had been a dull hum, shrieked a focused warning. Time seemed to slow. He didn't summon one for all. He wasn't sure he could, and his instincts told him revealing its full power was a mistake. Instead, he twisted his body, the water resisting but his muscles, now denser and stronger, overpowering it. The spear grazed his ribs, the hard water sharp enough to draw a thin line of green glowing blood. Mera's eyes widened slightly in surprise. His reflexes were incredible, even underwater. She made a more complex gesture, The water around Izuku swirled, forming a dozen more spears that hung in the water, all aimed at him. Impressive, she conceded. But you cannot dodge forever. The spears launched at once, a deadly barrage from all directions. Izuku didn't try to dodge. He kicked off the floor, a powerful thrust that sent him shooting upwards. As he moved, he focused, calling on a low, controlled burst of full cowling, just 5%. Green energy, faint but visible, crackled around him. It wasn't enough for a smash, but it was enough to amplify his speed tenfold. He became a green blur, weaving between the spears with impossible grace. The water churned in his wake as he moved in 3 dimensions, using the entire chamber as his playground. Mera watched, her expression shifting from contempt to grudging respect, and then to frustration. She was a master of hydrokinesis, one of the most powerful in all the 7 kingdoms. This surface boy, with no such power, was making a mockery of her attack through sheer physical prowess. She changed tactics. She clapped her hands together, and the water in the chamber began to swirl, forming a powerful vortex designed to trap him, to crush him with the force of a maelstrom. Izuku felt the pull, the current catching him. Fighting it head-on would be foolish. So he did the opposite. He let it pull him in, and at the last second, just as the crushing force was about to hit him, he used float. The secondary quirk, a gift from Nanashimura, was weak, but combined with his momentum, it was enough. He shot out of the top of the vortex, flipping in midair, and landed silently on the ceiling, his feet clinging to the polished surface. He hung there, upside down, breathing calmly. Mera stared up at him, her attack dissipated, her fury momentarily replaced by sheer disbelief. He was standing on the ceiling. He had defied her maelstrom with a single, inexplicable movement. Izuku looked down at her, and she saw no malice in his eyes. No anger. Only a deep, profound sadness. "Please," he said, his voice echoing in the now still water. "Stop. I don't want to fight you." He could have attacked. When he shot out of the vortex, he had a clear opening. He could have used his speed to land a blow she never would have seen coming. But he didn't. He had chosen de-escalation. He had chosen mercy. This was what truly stunned her. In her experience, forged in the warrior culture of Zeeble and the political machinations of Atlantis, strength was used to dominate. An opponent who showed an opening was an opponent to be struck down. This boy's refusal to take advantage of her was more alien than his biology. She slowly lowered her hands, the tension draining from her shoulders. Her face was a mask of confusion. This boy was not the brute she had imagined. He was fast, he was skilled, and he was honorable. "You are strange," she finally said, the words feeling inadequate. She turned, her red hair swirling around her like a cape, and swam out of the chamber without another word, leaving a stunned Vulko and a weary Izuku in her wake. Vulko glided over to Izuku, who had dropped from the ceiling. "Are you all right? That was an unacceptable breach of decorum." "I'm fine," Izuku said, touching the shallow cut on his side, which was already closing, another gift of his new biology. He looked at the doorway where Mera had disappeared. "She's afraid. She is proud," Vulko corrected. "It's the same thing," Izuku murmured. "She's afraid for her people. She thinks my world is going to destroy hers. So she has to be the one to strike first." He looked at Vulko, his eyes hardening with a familiar resolve. "You were right, Vulko. King Orem, Princess Mera, they're going to start a war they can't possibly understand, and everyone, on both sides, is going to lose." That night, Izuku couldn't rest. The confrontation with Mera, Vulko's warnings about Orem, the crushing weight of his isolation, it was all too much. He felt powerless, a hero stripped of his purpose, adrift in a world he was not meant for. He needed to do something. He needed to take control. He swam to the console in his room, the one Vulko had provided for his studies. He accessed its manufacturing capabilities. He didn't create a weapon. He didn't try to find a way to escape. He created a stylus, sharp and precise, and several thin, waterproof sheets of a material like flexible slate. He sat cross-legged in the middle of his chamber, the blue light of the room casting long shadows around him. He took the first sheet, and with the practice, almost manic energy of a scholar possessed, he began to write. At the top of the page, in a script that was a mixture of Japanese characters and newly learned Atlantean runes, he wrote the title, Hero Analysis for a New World. Volume 1. He didn't start with the king or the soldiers. He started with the person who had just challenged him. He sketched a detailed drawing of Princess Mera, her red hair flowing, her hands outstretched. Beside it, he began to break down her abilities. Name, Princess Mera of Zebel. Quirk equivalent, hydrokinesis. Power level, extremely high. Abilities, can manipulate water with incredible precision. Can increase the density of water to create hard water constructs, spears, shields, etc. Able to form large-scale environmental effects like whirlpools. Seems to require line of sight and gestural components. Possible weaknesses? What are the limits of her control? Range? Volume? Is she less effective away from large bodies of water? Note, irrelevant in current environment. He filled the page with notes, diagrams, and questions. He analyzed the guard's armor, the Manta sub's propulsion system, the city's energy dome. He turned his fear into data, his confusion into analysis. It was the only thing he knew how to do. It was his superpower, more so than any smash. He was Izuku Midoriya. He was lost, he was grieving, and he was a prisoner in a beautiful, alien cage. But as he filled page after page with his meticulous, borderline obsessive analysis, a flicker of the old fire returned to his eyes. He may not have been in his world, but he was still a hero, and a hero's job was to understand, to prepare, and to find a way to save everyone. Even from themselves. The summons came without warning. The pearlescent walls of Izuku's chamber dissolved, not into an open exit, but into a swirling vortex of deep blue water. For royal guards, their armor polished to a mirror shine and modeled after the fearsome visage of a great white shark, glided into the room. They carried ceremonial pikes that hummed with a low, contained energy. Their movements were synchronized, their expressions hidden behind visored helms, but their intent was perfectly, intimidatingly clear. Izuku, who had been meticulously sketching the energy patterns of the city's light crystals, looked up. His heart, which had finally found a semblance of calm in the rhythm of his analysis, began to pound a frantic, heavy beat against his ribs. One of the guards spoke, his voice a filtered, impersonal baritone. By decree of King Orem, the surface world anomaly is to be brought before the throne. There was no room for debate. It was not a request. Izuku slowly rose, his new notebooks clutched in his hand. Another guard glided forward and gently, but firmly, took the slates from him. He watched them go, a small piece of his carefully constructed sanity taken away. He was left with nothing but the simple gray trousers he wore and the faint, emerald glow of his own, alien power. Flanked by the guards, Izuku was escorted from his chamber for the first time. They moved through vast, vaulted hallways carved from living coral, the walls embedded with veins of glowing lapis lazuli. Citizens of Atlantis, tall and graceful, stopped and stared as he passed. Their whispers followed him, a chorus of clicks and whistles that his developing ear for the language could just begin to parse. The Outlander, is it true he breathes the water? Look at his skin, so pale. And the energy, an ill omen. The king will deal with it. He was a freak on display, a living embodiment of the dry world his captors so despised. He kept his eyes forward, his jaw tight. He would not show them fear. He was a student of Yue High. He was the successor to All Might. He would face this with the dignity of a hero, even if he was a world away from anyone who knew what that meant. They arrived at two colossal doors wrought from obsidian and inlaid with gold, depicting a triumphant King Atlan riding a colossal sea dragon. The doors swung inward silently, revealing the throne room. The chamber was immense, a natural grotto expanded and perfected by centuries of hydrokinetic craftsmanship. The ceiling was a dome of flawless, transparent crystal, through which the deep, dark blue of the ocean was visible, a constant reminder of their place in the world. Bioluminescent moss grew in intricate patterns across the floor, casting an ethereal green and gold light that danced in the water. The throne itself was carved from a single, titanic pearl, and it was flanked by the skeletons of two petrified leviathans, their bone-white jaws open in a silent, eternal roar. and on the throne sat King Orem. If Mera was a figure of regal, fiery pride, Orem was the embodiment of charismatic, absolute authority. He was tall and powerfully built, his blonde hair slicked back from a handsome, chiseled face. He wore magnificent golden armor, intricately detailed with the sigils of the Atlantean royal house, and a cape of shimmering, deep purple fabric billowed slowly behind him in the current. In his hand he held his trident, not the legendary weapon of Atlan, but his own, a gleaming silver weapon with 3 deadly, barbed tines. His eyes, a piercing, cold blue, locked onto Izuku the moment he entered, and in their depths, Izuku saw no curiosity, no mercy. He saw only a profound, unshakable conviction. Volko stood to the left of the throne, his expression a carefully neutral mask that failed to hide the deep worry in his eyes. Mera was on the right, her arms crossed, her face a storm of conflicting emotions. She had not spoken of their confrontation, but Izuku could feel her gaze on him, heavy with judgment and a sliver of something else he couldn't name. Izuku and his escort halted in the center of the room. The guards knelt, but Izuku remained standing. He would not kneel. It was a small act of defiance, but it was his. Orem's lips curled into a faint, condescending smirk. So, the great mystery from the dry world. I must confess I am underwhelmed. You are little more than a boy. His voice was a deep, resonant baritone, amplified by the chamber's acoustics. It was a voice accustomed to being obeyed. My name is Izuku Midoriya, Izuku said, his own voice clear and steady, refusing to be intimidated. I do not care what you call yourself, Orem retorted, leaning forward on his throne. I care what you are. You are an intruder. A pollution. Volko here finds you fascinating. He fills my ears with tales of your unique biology, your inner power. He suggests you may be a bridge between our worlds. Orem paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the water. I disagree. I see you not as a bridge, but as a symptom of the disease. A symbol of the surface world's careless, chaotic nature, bleeding into my ocean. The surface world is not a disease, Izuku countered, his voice rising with passion. It is filled with people. Families. People who laugh and dream and hurt. Just like yours. Orem's eyes flashed with anger. Do not presume to compare your fleeting, mud-crawling existence to the 1,000-year legacy of Atlantis. You speak of dreams? We have watched for generations as your world's nightmares seep into ours. Your sunken warships leak their poisons, your plastic filth chokes our wildlife, your sonic blasts deafen our brethren. You are a race of parasites, and your time is at an end. The conviction in his voice was absolute. This was not a tyrant's rant. It was a deeply held belief, nurtured by a lifetime of seeing the worst his world had to offer. Izuku realized with a sinking heart that reasoning with this man was impossible. He was a zealot. My counsel, Orem continued, his gaze sweeping over Volko and the other assembled nobles, is divided. Some, like Volko, counsel study and caution. Others demand your immediate execution as a spy. He leaned back, a theatrical gesture of contemplation. I, however, believe in the value of demonstration. The people are unsettled by your presence. They need to see for themselves what the surface world truly represents. Orem stood, his full height and presence dominating the room. He pointed his trident at Izuku. I, King Orem, son of Orvax, master of the oceans, challenge you, the surface world anomaly, to a duel. The Ring of Fire. Trial by combat. A collective gasp went through the assembled nobles. Volko took a half-step forward, his face pale with alarm. Your Majesty, this is unorthodox. He is unarmed, untrained in our ways. It would be a slaughter, not a trial. He possesses a great inner power, does he not, Volko? Orem said, a cruel glint in his eye. Let him use it. Let us see the might of the surface dweller. If he is as powerful as you claim, he will survive. If not, he let the implication hang in the water. Then he will serve as a valuable lesson to any in my court who believe the surface is anything other than weak and pathetic. His eyes flicked to Mera as he said this, a subtle but clear message. This wasn't just about Izuku. This was a political statement. It was Orem consolidating his power, silencing dissent, and proving the righteousness of his impending war. Izuku was not a person. He was a prop in a grand, deadly play. Izuku's mind raced. To refuse was to be branded a coward, likely to be executed anyway. To accept was to face a master of this environment, a king in his element, a warrior trained since birth. It was a death sentence. But then he remembered his training. He remembered All Might's words. A hero can always break out of a tough spot. He looked at ORM's arrogant smirk, at the fear in Vulko's eyes, at the conflict in Mira's. He had to fight. Not just for himself, but to prove them wrong. To show them that power wasn't about domination, and that the surface world wasn't what they thought it was. I accept your challenge, Izuku said, his voice ringing with a resolve that surprised even himself. ORM smiled. It was a predator's smile. Excellent. The combat will be held at the next high tide. Let the people of Atlantis bear witness. The Ring of Fire was Atlantis's grand arena, a colossal structure carved into the side of a dormant, underwater volcano. Thousands of Atlanteans filled the tiered seats, their murmurs a constant, low roar. The ring itself was the caldera of the volcano, a vast, circular expanse of black volcanic rock. Running along the rim of the caldera, a channel of molten lava, contained by powerful magnetic fields and crystalline barriers, cast a hellish, dancing red and orange glow on the battlefield, making the water boil and shimmer. It was a place of spectacle and death. Izuku stood on one side of the arena, alone. The guards had given him a simple harness and a rebreather, a small, ornate device that fit over his nose and mouth. A courtesy, one had sneered, so the crowd may hear your screams. It was useless to him, but he wore it as a sign that he was still, at his core, human. Across the caldera, King ORM made his entrance to a thunderous roar from the crowd. He was a vision of royal power, his golden armor gleaming in the lava's light. He held his silver trident, its tines seeming to drink in the fiery glow. He raised it to the crowd, and they roared his name. ORM! ORM! Ocean Master! Izuku took a deep breath of water, trying to center himself. He could feel one for all simmering beneath his skin, a reservoir of power eager to be unleashed. But he couldn't just go wild. A 100% smash underwater would create a cavitation explosion that could level half the arena, and himself along with it. A high percentage full cowling would be incredibly fast, but the water resistance would burn him out in seconds. He had to be smart. He had to be strategic. Observe. Analyze. Adapt. It was the mantra of his entire hero career. He fell into his familiar pre-fight ritual, his lips moving silently, his eyes darting around the arena. Opponent King ORM. Quirk equivalent, master of armed combat, peak Atlantean physical condition. Environment is his greatest weapon. He understands the currents, the pressure, the flow. I don't. Advantage his. My abilities, one for all, up to 45% safely. Float. Black Whip. Danger Sense. Danger Sense is humming. He's not an immediate threat, just a potential one. The entire situation is the threat. Okay. Don't fight his fight. Fight my fight. A deep, resonant gong echoed through the water, signaling the start of the duel. ORM didn't charge. He simply pushed off the ground, gliding towards Izuku with the effortless grace of a shark, his trident held loosely in one hand. He was radiating an aura of supreme confidence. This was a formality to him, an execution with extra steps. Let this be your final lesson, surface dweller, ORM said as he approached, his voice calm. The ocean does not tolerate weakness. With a flick of his wrist, he thrust the trident. The movement was a blur, faster than Izuku had anticipated. Danger Sense flared, and Izuku dropped into a low crouch, the trident's tines hissing past where his head had been, the water displacement alone a powerful blow. He pushed off, activating a 20% full cowling. He didn't attack, he moved, circling ORM, forcing the king to turn. He was testing the water, feeling the drag, the way his movements created eddies and currents. He was learning the battlefield. ORM scoffed. A coward's tactics. You run like a frightened minnow. He spun, his trident arcing in a wide, horizontal sweep. Izuku jumped, using float to give him an extra boost, clearing the attack easily. He landed silently 20 feet away. The crowd murmured, a mixture of disappointment and surprise. They had expected a quick, brutal end. They were getting a dance. "You talk too much," Izuku shot back, his voice filtered through the rebreather. The taunt hit its mark. ORM's eyes narrowed, his arrogance pricked. He charged, no longer gliding, but with powerful, targeted thrusts of his legs. He was a whirlwind of silver and gold, his trident a continuous, deadly blur. He stabbed, he slashed, he spun, each movement seamlessly flowing into the next, using the water to enhance his momentum. Izuku was on the defensive, and it was taking everything he had. This was not like fighting a villain on land. Every dodge was sluggish, every leap was a struggle against the crushing medium. He was using danger sense to anticipate, his analytical mind to predict the arc of the trident based on ORM's shoulder movements, and low-level full cowling to give him the speed to react. He was a green spark, constantly moving, never in one place for more than a second. The floor of the arena became scarred with deep gouges where the trident struck. From the royal box, Mera watched with a tense, unreadable expression. She had expected the boy to be overwhelmed in seconds. But he was surviving. More than surviving, he was learning. She could see it in his movements. His initial, clumsy dodges were becoming more fluid, more efficient. He was starting to use the water, not just fight against it. He would use the wake from ORM's attacks to propel his own evasions. He was adapting at an impossible rate. "He is resilient," Volko murmured beside her, his voice tight with a mixture of fear and pride. "He is only delaying the inevitable," Mera replied, though her voice lacked its earlier conviction. Back in the ring, Izuku knew he couldn't dodge forever. He needed to create an opening. He needed to change the dynamics of the fight. As ORM lunged again, Izuku did something unexpected. Instead of dodging away, he dodged in. He dropped low, sliding under the trident's thrust, getting inside ORM's reach. At the same time, tendrils of black, raw energy erupted from his arms. "Black Whip!" The tendrils shot out, not at ORM, but at the jagged volcanic rocks on the arena floor behind him. They anchored instantly. Izuku pulled. The sudden, violent change in trajectory caught ORM completely off guard. Izuku used the momentum to swing around behind the king, his feet leaving the floor. As he swung, he cocked back his fist, green lightning crackling around it. It wasn't a smash. It was a feint. A distraction. ORM, a master combatant, reacted instantly. He spun, bringing the butt of his trident around to block the anticipated blow to his back. But Izuku's target wasn't his back. As he swung past, he released one of Black Whip's anchors, causing his trajectory to change again. He was now facing ORM, almost chest to chest, and his real attack was a low percentage, focused kick aimed directly at the king's trident-wielding hand. "Manchester! Kick!" he grunted, putting 30% into the blow. The impact was sharp and concussive. The water did little to dampen the focus force. There was a sickening crunch of breaking fingers, and a gasp of pain from the ocean master. The silver trident flew from his grasp, spinning end over end before clattering onto the volcanic rocks several yards away. A stunned, absolute silence fell over the arena. The entire crowd, the nobles, Volko, Mera, they were all frozen in disbelief. The surface dweller, the anomaly, the boy who was meant to be a sacrificial lamb, had just disarmed the king of Atlantis. ORM stared at his hand, his fingers bent at an unnatural angle. The shock on his face was quickly replaced by a wave of pure, unadulterated fury. The humiliation was a physical thing, a burning fire in his chest that dwarfed the heat from the lava. "You, vermin!" he hissed, his voice trembling with rage. He lunged, no longer a graceful warrior, but a berserker. He ignored his trident, his fists now his weapons. He was still incredibly strong, his punches carrying the weight of a freight train. But now, it was a fight Izuku understood. Unarmed combat. He met ORM's charge, no longer just evading, but blocking and parrying. He was still smaller, still technically weaker in pure physical strength, but he was faster, more agile, and his fighting style was a bizarre, unpredictable mix of his own analysis and Gran Torino's erratic movements. He flowed around ORM's furious assault, the green sparks of full cowling a stark contrast to the red glow of the arena. He saw his opening. ORM, blinded by rage, overextended with a wild haymaker. Izuku ducked under the punch. He channeled 45% into his fist, the highest he could safely control without shattering his own bones. The green lightning around his arm intensified, a miniature storm. He wasn't aiming for a knockout blow. He was aiming to make a statement. He slammed his fist into ORM's armored stomach. Detroit smash! The underwater shockwave was immense. It wasn't a sharp crack, but a deep, resonant boom that vibrated through the entire arena, felt in the bones of every spectator. The water in front of his fist vaporized for a microsecond, creating a visible cavitation bubble that then collapsed on itself. ORM's eyes went wide with shock and pain. The blow didn't break his advanced armor, but the kinetic force transferred through it was staggering. He was lifted off his feet and sent hurtling backward through the water, tumbling end over end like a discarded toy. He crashed into the far wall of the arena, cracking the rock, and slumped to the floor, gasping for water, the wind completely knocked out of him. Izuku stood in the center of the ring, his fist smoking with green energy, his chest heaving. The silence in the arena was now absolute, a silence of pure, unadulterated shock. He had done it. He had landed a solid, undeniable blow. He had won the exchange, but the fight wasn't over. ORM pushed himself to his feet, his body trembling, a thin trickle of blue blood running from the corner of his mouth. The look in his eyes was no longer just rage. It was a cold, murderous hatred. The humiliation was complete. This boy had not only disarmed him, but had bested him in front of his entire kingdom. I have indulged this spectacle long enough. ORM snarled, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He raised his uninjured hand, not towards Izuku, but towards the ring of lava. The water around him began to churn, to heat. He was a master of the ocean, and that included its thermal vents, its volcanoes. He was drawing on the raw, primordial power of the earth itself. You have shown your power, surface dweller. He roared, his voice now magically amplified, booming across the arena. Now witness mine! Witness the power of a true king! The lava in the channel surged. With a great, sweeping gesture, ORM pulled a massive, writhing tendril of molten rock out of its containment field. The crystalline barrier shattered, and the superheated rock hissed and steamed as it hit the colder water, forming a crust of black obsidian around a glowing, molten core. It was a whip of fire and earth, a weapon of geological fury. Izuku's danger sense went from a hum to a piercing, mind-splitting scream. This will kill you. This is not a duel. This is an execution. ORM cracked the lava whip, and it shot towards Izuku, boiling the water in its path. Izuku leaped away, the heat scorching his back even from a distance. The whip struck the ground where he had been standing, and the volcanic rock exploded in a shower of molten shrapnel. This was no longer a fair fight. This was a king throwing a tantrum with the power to melt mountains. Izuku was back on the defensive, pushing his full cowling to its absolute limit, a frantic green blur avoiding streaks of molten death. The crowd was no longer silent. They were screaming, a mixture of bloodlust and terror. Mera watched from the royal box, her face pale. This was not honor. This was not a trial. This was murder. ORM's pride had been wounded, and he was willing to break all customs, to shatter the sanctity of the duel, to soothe it. She looked at the boy, fighting for his life against impossible odds, and saw not a pollutant, but a warrior. A warrior who had shown mercy when he could have been ruthless, who had fought with honor against a man who had none. ORM was toying with him now, using the lava whip to hurt him, to cut off his escape. Izuku was tiring, his movements becoming more desperate. He was trapped. With a final, triumphant roar, ORM lashed the whip not at Izuku, but in a wide circle around him, creating a cage of molten rock that quickly hardened into a prison of jagged obsidian. Izuku was trapped inside, the water around him rapidly heating to a boiling point. Now you will boil. ORM spat, stalking towards the cage. A fitting end for a creature of the hot, dry wastes. Inside the cage, Izuku was running out of time. The heat was unbearable. He could feel his skin starting to blister. He had one option left. A reckless, desperate, all-or-nothing move. He began to focus one for all into his legs, pushing it past his 45% limit. 50%. 60%. The bones in his legs screamed a protest he ignored. He crouched low, the obsidian floor cracking under the strain. ORM reached the cage, peering through the gaps with a victorious sneer. 100%. Izuku whispered through the rebreather, the word a prayer. He unleashed it all in a single, upward leap. St. Louis! Smash! The result was an explosion of force directed straight down. The entire floor of the obsidian cage disintegrated. Izuku shot upwards like a missile, a green comet trailed by black rock and superheated steam. He burst through the top of his cage, a creature of pure, unrestrained power. The arena was blinded by the flash of green light. ORM, caught completely by surprise, barely had time to look up before Izuku was upon him. This time, there was no mercy. No holding back. Izuku's fist, wreathed in the 100% power of One for All, connected squarely with ORM's jaw. It was not a smash. It was an erasure of force. The sound was not a boom, but a sharp, deafening crack that echoed like a thunderclap. For a single, frozen moment, ORM's body went completely rigid. Then, his eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed, unconscious before he even hit the ground, his body sinking slowly to the arena floor like a felled statue. Izuku landed, his body screaming in protest. The arm that had delivered the punch was a mess of purple and red, fractured in a dozen places. His legs ached with the strain of his jump. But he was standing. He stood over the unconscious form of the king of Atlantis, the victor. The silence that followed was different. It was not shock. It was awe, and a deep, unsettling fear. This boy, this outlander, had done the impossible. He had defeated their king. Izuku looked up at the thousands of faces staring down at him, and for the first time, he didn't see contempt or curiosity. He saw respect. He saw terror. He had wanted to show them he wasn't a monster, but in unleashing his full power, he may have just become something far more terrifying in their eyes. He had won the duel, but his ordeal was far from over. He had proven his strength, but in doing so, he had shattered the political landscape of Atlantis. As the royal guards finally rushed into the ring, their weapons hesitantly lowered, Izuku Midoriya knew one thing for certain. His life was about to get much more complicated. He was no longer just an anomaly. He was a contender. The aftermath of the duel was a suffocating, silent storm. Izuku was not celebrated as a victor, nor was he immediately imprisoned as a regicidal usurper. He was simply contained, escorted from the ring of fire by a squad of royal guards whose movements were now marked by a hesitant, fearful respect. He was not returned to his comfortable scientific chamber. Instead, he was taken to a place that served as a symbol of his new, uncertain status in the grand hierarchy of Atlantis. ORM, in a final act of spite before the healer sealed his shattered jaw and began the long process of mending his pride, had not executed Izuku. To do so would be to admit the duel was illegitimate, further eroding his authority. Instead, he had declared Izuku unworthy of royal attention. The surface dweller was no longer a guest, no longer a scientific curiosity. He was cast out. Banished. Not from Atlantis itself, that would be too clean, too merciful, but from the gleaming, privileged upper spires of the city. Izuku was exiled to the lower districts. The Undercity. The descent was a journey through the very strata of Atlantean society. They left behind the pearlescent towers and coral-sculpted avenues, the water clear and filled with shimmering schools of decorative fish. They sank past the mid-levels, the bustling mercantile districts and the stark, utilitarian structures of the military barracks. The light from the city's glowing crystals grew dimmer, the water colder and heavier with silt. They arrived in a place that was Atlantis's dark, forgotten reflection. Here, the buildings were not grown from living coral but carved from the grim, black rock of the seafloor. They were functional, crowded, and ancient, bearing the scars of centuries of pressure and neglect. Bioluminescence was not an art form here, it was a necessity, provided by clusters of glowing anemones and strains of phosphorescent algae that grew in patchwork gardens, casting a murky, greenish-yellow light. The grand avenues were replaced by narrow, winding canyons between buildings, and the citizens were different, too. Their armor, if they wore any, was pitted and utilitarian. Their bodies were leaner, tougher, built for labor rather than courtly leisure. These were the miners, the engineers, the trench scavengers, the people who kept the glorious city above them running. The guards deposited Izuku in a small, empty plaza, the ground a mosaic of broken shells. "This is your domain now, surface dweller," the captain sneered, though the insult lacked the conviction it once had. "Try not to choke on it." They turned and ascended, their powerful propulsion packs leaving trails of bubbles that vanished into the gloom above, leaving Izuku utterly alone. He stood there for a long time, the weight of his new reality settling upon him. He was free, in a sense, but he was more trapped than ever. Above him, a king now nursed a murderous grudge. Around him, a populace viewed him with a mixture of suspicion and fear. And beyond the city's dome, a world that thought him dead continued on without him. His arm, hastily mended by a low-level healer on ORM's orders, throbbed with a dull, phantom pain, a reminder of the cost of his victory. But despair was a luxury Izuku Midoriya had never been able to afford. His eyes, now fully adapted to the low light, began to scan his surroundings. He wasn't seeing a prison, he was seeing a community. He saw a child chase a glowing pufferfish down an alley. He saw a group of off-duty miners sharing a meal of kelp jerky. He saw a hydromechanic struggling to repair a sputtering public filtration vent, the water around it growing cloudy with grit. He saw people who needed help. And so, the hero known as Deku, stripped of his name, his world, and his status, did the only thing he knew how to do. He started helping. His first act was simple. He swam over to the struggling mechanic, a gruff, powerfully built Atlantean with 4 arms, a trait common among the laboring class. "Looks like you're having trouble," Izuku said, his Atlantean still accented but clear. The mechanic glared at him, his multiple eyes narrowing. "And what would you know about it, Outlander? This is Series 7 thermohydraulics. Go on, swim away before you get hurt." Instead of leaving, Izuku just watched. His analytical mind kicked into gear. He observed the failing pressure couplings, the weak energy flow from the conduit, the mechanic's frustrated, brute force approach. "You're trying to force the primary valve," Izuku stated. "But the blockage is in the secondary intake. The pressure is backing up. You need to vent the system from the bottom first." The mechanic paused, his wrench, a tool made from the sharpened jawbone of a Dunkleistus, held in midair. He looked from the vent to Izuku, then back again. What the boy said actually made sense. Grumbling, he swam to the bottom of the unit and twisted a small, overlooked release valve. With a great belch of silt and a high-pressure hiss, the system cleared. A moment later, the primary valve turned with ease. The vent whirred to life, the water around it clearing instantly. The 4-armed Atlantean stared at Izuku, his gruff demeanor cracking for a moment to reveal pure astonishment. How did you know that? I like to watch how things work," Izuku replied with a small, genuine smile. This small act was the beginning. Word of the strange, green-haired surface dweller who had defeated the king and now resided in the Undercity spread like a ripple. At first, it was fear and suspicion. He was ORM shame, a dangerous beast cast into their midst. But Izuku's actions slowly began to rewrite that narrative. He didn't seek glory or recognition. His heroism was quiet, practical, and relentless. He used the immense, controlled strength of one for all not to fight, but to lift. When a deep-sea pressure shift caused a section of a residential block to groan and threaten collapse, Izuku was there, bracing the massive stone structure with his bare hands, his body wreathed in green energy, while the families inside evacuated. He became a living buttress, a pillar of quiet strength. He used Black Whip not to ensnare foes, but to rescue. When a young Atlantean swimmer was swept into the powerful intake of the city's massive geothermal turbines, Izuku fired a tendril of black energy that wrapped around the boy's waist, pulling him to safety moments before he would have been shredded. He became a constant presence, a guardian. He stopped petty criminals, mostly desperate scavengers fighting over scraps, not with bone-breaking force, but with swift, non-lethal efficiency, disarming and restraining them before turning them over to the overworked Undercity Watch. He helped haul heavy mining equipment, repaired broken aqueducts with his knowledge of pressure dynamics, and shared what little food was offered to him with the children. They stopped calling him the Anomaly, or the Outlander. He became known by a new name, a whispered title of respect and wonder, Kelenvar. The Emerald Stranger. He was no king, no noble. He was one of them. He understood their struggles because he lived them. He ate the same bland nutrient paste, slept in a small, abandoned grotto, and breathed the same silted water. He saw their daily lives, the way they were overlooked by the glittering city above, their resources diverted to fund ORM's growing war machine. He saw ORM's neglect, and in his heart, the quiet embers of a hero's righteous anger began to glow. It was in this grotto, lit by a single, pulsing jellyfish he'd befriended, that Volko found him. The royal advisor arrived unannounced, his fine robes a stark contrast to the grim reality of the Undercity. He looked older, more careworn than when Izuku had last seen him. The political climate in the upper spires, he explained, had grown toxic. ORM was paranoid and vengeful, seeing spies and traitors in every shadow. His war preparations had accelerated. Fleets were being mustered. The first strike against the surface was no longer a question of if, but when. I have heard the stories, Volko said, his gaze sweeping over Izuku's humble dwelling. They call you the Emerald Stranger. They say you have the strength of a Leviathan and the heart of a protector. I'm just doing what I can, Izuku said, shrugging. It was the simple, honest truth. You are doing more than you know, Volko replied, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You have given these people something they have not had in generations, hope, a symbol of strength that is not tied to conquest or bloodline. You have shown them what a true protector looks like. He paused, his expression growing deadly serious. And that is why I am here. Izuku Midoriya, I was wrong to believe that King ORM could be reasoned with. His pride has curdled into tyranny. He is leading Atlantis to ruin, and he will drag the entire world down with him. He must be stopped. I know, Izuku said, his fists clenching. But how? I beat him in a duel, and all it got me was this. He gestured to the grimy walls around them. He's the king. The people above, they worship him. They worship the throne, not the man, Volko corrected. And the throne of Atlantis is more than just a seat of power. It is a sacred trust. A trust ORM has broken. He swam closer, his eyes gleaming with the light of a desperate, audacious plan. There is another way to claim the throne. A path beyond birthright or even trial by combat. A way to prove oneself worthy not just in the eyes of the people, but in the eyes of the ocean itself. Volko then told him a story Izuku had only read about in the historical scrolls, the legend of Atlan, the first and greatest king of Atlantis. When Atlantis sank, Volko recounted, his voice taking on the cadence of a master storyteller. It was Atlan who guided us, who used his wisdom and his great power to build our new world in the depths. But in his later years, he grew disillusioned with the petty squabbles of the kingdoms. He saw that power, even his own, could corrupt. And so, before he exiled himself to the hidden corners of the world, he forged a weapon of immense power, the Trident of Atlan. Izuku's eyes widened. He had seen ORM's trident. He knew it was a symbol of power. ORM's trident is a pale imitation, a mere scepter, Volko clarified. The true trident was forged by the greatest minds of our civilization from Poseidon's steel. It was imbued with the power to command the very ocean, to communicate with all sea life, to control the weather and the tides. It is not merely a weapon, it is the key to Atlantis' soul. Atlan decreed that only the one worthy of the title true king could wield it. And in the hands of the true king, its power is absolute. Its bearer holds undeniable authority over all 7 kingdoms. Where is it? Izuku asked, his heart beginning to beat faster. This was it. This was the path. Lost, Volko said with a sigh. Atlan hid it before he vanished, leaving behind only cryptic clues. For thousands of years, scholars and warriors have sought it. All have failed. ORM himself searched for it for years before giving up and declaring it a myth, a child's fairy tale. But you don't think it's a myth? Izuku stated, seeing the fire in the old advisor's eyes. I do not, Volko confirmed. And I believe I know why all others have failed. They sought the trident for power, for glory, for the right to rule. They sought it with ambition in their hearts. The legends say that Atlan's final enchantment was not one of strength, but of spirit. The trident can only be found and wielded by one who seeks not to rule, but to serve. One who seeks not to conquer, but to protect. Vulko's gaze locked onto Izuku's, and the unspoken meaning was as clear as the water in the upper spires. You believe I could be worthy? Izuku whispered, the idea so immense, so audacious, that it almost made him dizzy. Him? A lost kid from Japan? A king? I believe your heart is truer than any Atlantean I have ever known, Vulko said with conviction. I have seen what you do when you think no one is watching. I have seen the way you protect the powerless. That, Izuku Midoriya, is the quality of a true king. The plan was insane. A fool's errand. A chase for a mythological weapon based on an old man's desperate hope. But it was the only plan they had. It was the only way to stop the impending war. For the first time since he had arrived in this world, Izuku saw a flicker of a path that didn't just lead to survival, but to victory. A way to save not just himself, but 2 entire worlds. I'll do it, he said, the words tasting of destiny. Tell me where to start. Before Vulko could reply, a third figure shimmered into existence at the entrance to the grotto. It was Mera. She was not clad in her royal emerald armor. She wore a simpler, dark blue bodysuit, practical and unadorned. Her expression was hard, but the haughty disdain was gone, replaced by a grim resolve. She had been listening, cloaked by a subtle hydrokinetic distortion of the water around her. He will not go alone, she announced, her voice leaving no room for argument. Vulko and Izuku stared at her in shock. Princess? Vulko stammered. You would defy King Orm? Your betrothed? The man I am betrothed to is a tyrant who defiles the sanctity of a sacred duel because his pride is wounded, Mera stated, her eyes flashing with anger. The king I swore to serve would not hoard food from the lower districts to feed an army for a needless war. I am a princess of Zebel and a daughter of Atlantis. My loyalty is to my people, not to Orm's ambition. And my people deserve a ruler, not a warmonger. Her gaze shifted to Izuku. It was a complex look, a mixture of her old skepticism and a new, hard-won respect. I saw what you did in the arena. You had him beaten. Disarmed. You could have humiliated him further, but you showed restraint. And then, when he showed you no honor, you showed him overwhelming power. And in this forgotten place, she gestured around the grotto. You used that same power to mend pipes and lift rubble. You are still an anomaly, surface dweller. A paradox. But Vulko is right. Your spirit, it is worthy of a king. The alliance was forged in that moment, in the dim, murky light of the Undercity. A disgraced advisor, a rebellious princess, and a hero from another world, united by a single, desperate purpose. Mera's contribution was immediate and vital. While Vulko had the historical knowledge, she had the practical resources. Her father, King Nereus of Zebel, while publicly allied with Orm, was a cautious man. He had long maintained secret archives, independent of Atlantis, preserving the oldest and most forbidden legends. Among them, Mera had once seen a scroll, a relic from the time of Atlan himself, that was said to contain the first piece of the puzzle to finding the trident. It is kept in a hidden vault in the royal archives, she explained. Getting to it will be difficult. The archives are patrolled by the Praetorian Guard, ORM's most elite soldiers. Then we will have to be clever, Vulko said. The heist was planned with the meticulous detail of one of Izuku's hero analyses. Vulko used his access to disable a section of the archive's surveillance grid for a mere 90 seconds. Mera would use her knowledge of the secret passages to get them inside. And Izuku? Izuku would be their distraction and their muscle. The plan went into motion during the changing of the guard. Mera led them through a narrow, forgotten maintenance conduit that opened behind a tapestry depicting the victory over the Trench Kingdom. As they slipped into the grand, silent archive, with its towering shelves of glowing scrolls, Izuku felt a surge of familiar adrenaline. An alarm, silent and localized, tripped as Mera opened the hidden vault. 2 Praetorian guards, larger and more heavily armored than the regular soldiers, immediately converged on their position. Go! Izuku whispered, pushing Mera and Vulko towards the vault. "I'll buy you the time," he shot out from behind a shelf, a green blur in the dimly lit hall. The guards, startled, immediately raised their energy pikes. "The anomaly!" one shouted. "He's trying to escape." Izuku didn't engage them head-on. He became a ghost. He used the towering shelves as cover, ricocheting off the walls and ceiling, a disorienting display of speed and agility. He led them on a chase through the labyrinthine archive, always staying just out of reach, their energy blasts scorching the shelves he had been near just a moment before. Inside the vault, Mera and Vulko worked quickly. They found the scroll, sealed in a watertight, crystalline case. Just as they secured it, they heard a loud crash from outside. Izuku, seeing their time was almost up, had created his final distraction. He'd used Black Whip to topple a massive, decorative statue of ORM, blocking the guard's path in a shower of rubble. The trio rendezvoused at the conduit and slipped away, the sounds of shouting guards fading behind them. They made their way to a secluded, private hangar on the outskirts of the city, a place known only to the Zebellian royal family. Waiting for them was a small, sleek submersible, a royal skiff shaped like a needle-nosed gar. It was old, but its power source still hummed with life. "This will take us beyond the city's patrol routes," Mera said, her hands flying across the controls, the skiff humming to life. As the small craft powered up, Vulko unsealed the case and unrolled the ancient scroll. The kelp paper was impossibly old, the runes upon it faded. It was not a map in the traditional sense, but a riddle, written in Atlan's own hand. Vulko read it aloud, his voice filled with reverence. "To find the heart of the sea, you must first seek its memory in the land that has forgotten water. In the kingdom of the shifting sands, where the sun has boiled the ocean dry, my second clue lies waiting." Izuku's eyes widened in realization. "The land that has forgotten water. He means the desert, the deserter kingdom." Vulko breathed, his eyes wide. "One of the 7 kingdoms." It was an inland sea, connected to the ocean. When Atlantis sank, the geological shifts cut it off, and it evaporated over the centuries, leaving only a desert. The Sahara. Mera charted the course, the skiff's navigation system highlighting a location on the coast of Africa. "It is a dangerous journey. We will have to pass through the territories of hostile tribes and avoid ORM's long-range patrols." As the royal skiff silently detached from its mooring and slipped out of a hidden exit in the city's dome, leaving the breathtaking beauty of Atlantis behind for the cold, crushing dark of the open ocean, Izuku felt a profound sense of purpose. He was no longer a victim of fate, a castaway adrift in a strange world. He was on a mission. A quest. He looked at his companions, a wise but disgraced scholar and a fierce, noble princess. They were a strange, unlikely team, bound by a desperate gamble to save a world. His quest to get home had become something infinitely larger. To get home, he first had to save this place from itself. He had to stop a war, find a legendary weapon, and prove himself worthy of a title he never wanted. The quest for the Trident of Atlan had begun. The journey from the crushing, vibrant dark of the deep ocean to the searing, empty light of the surface was a brutal transition. Their royal skiff, a marvel of Atlantean engineering, ascended through the water column with silent, breathtaking speed, its hull shimmering as it adapted to the rapidly decreasing pressure. For Izuku, the sight of the water lightening from impenetrable black to midnight blue, then to cobalt, and finally to a brilliant, sun-dappled turquoise was a homecoming he had only dreamed of. But when the skiff breached the surface, the reality of his old world hit him with the force of a physical blow. The air. It was the first thing he noticed. Dry, hot, and thin, it felt like fire in his newly adapted lungs. His body, now designed to extract oxygen from a dense, liquid medium, struggled and spasmed. A racking, water-filled cough escaped him, his body trying to reject the very atmosphere that had once sustained him. Then came the light. After months in the ethereal, filtered glow of Atlantis, the raw, unfiltered glare of the African sun was a physical assault. He squinted, his eyes watering, the world outside the skiff's canopy a blinding sheet of white and gold, and the gravity. In the neutral buoyancy of the ocean, he was grace and power. Here, on the surface, gravity was a leaden cloak, a tangible weight that pulled at his limbs and reminded him of his own mortality. He was not alone in his suffering. Vulko, the scholar, was observing his own reactions with a detached, clinical fascination, his skin paling to a sickly gray under the sun's glare. But Mera, the proud warrior princess, was visibly distressed. She shielded her eyes, her movements sluggish and clumsy, her fiery hair seeming to lose its luster in the dry air. She was a creature of the water, and this was an alien, hostile hell. The air, it is abrasive, Vulko noted, his voice a dry rasp. And the heat, fascinating. A world cooked by its own star, it is a wasteland. Mera countered, her voice tight with discomfort. How do your people even survive here? Izuku didn't answer. He was staring out at the endless expanse of the Sahara Desert. The skiff had landed, its hull half buried in a dune of fine, golden sand. All around them, for as far as the eye could see, was a rolling sea of sand, baked and shimmering under the colossal blue sky. It was beautiful, desolate, and achingly familiar. This was the world he had lost, and the sight of it, the feeling of it, was a bittersweet agony. He felt a pang of homesickness so profound it almost brought him to his knees. We adapt, he finally said, his voice hoarse. He focused, forcing his body to adjust, the latent energy from his transdimensional journey giving him a slight edge over his companions. He took another breath, slower this time, and it felt slightly less like swallowing embers. We need to find the entrance to the old city before we dehydrate. Atlan's riddle said it was here, in the kingdom that has forgotten water. Vulko produced the scroll, shielding it from the harsh light. The deserter kingdom was built around its central temple, a marvel of hydroengineering that managed the water levels of their inland sea. If any part of the city survived, it would be the temple. The ancient charts place it here. He pointed to a spot on a holographic map projected from his gauntlet, a location several miles into the desert. Their task seemed impossible. They were looking for a single stone ruin buried under an entire ocean of sand. Mera, however, was not without resources, even here. She closed her eyes, her brow furrowed in concentration. She was a master of hydrokinesis, and while there was no ocean, there was moisture. In the air, in the ground, even within their own bodies. The air is thin, the water content barely a trace. She murmured, her hands held open. But it is there. Slowly, miraculously, the air around her began to shimmer. Tiny, invisible droplets of humidity began to coalesce. A single drop of water formed on her fingertip, then another. It was a painstaking, exhausting process, like trying to build a castle from dust motes. After several long, tense minutes, she had gathered a sphere of water about the size of her fist, which hovered in the air before her, a perfect, impossible jewel in the heart of the desert. She was panting from the effort, sweat beading on her forehead and evaporating almost instantly. I can do more, she said, her voice strained. But it will take time. I can sense a larger deposit deep underground. A residual aquifer. But it is far below the sand and rock. Izuku looked from the tiny sphere of water to the endless dunes. They couldn't wait for Mera to slowly draw water to the surface. They needed to dig. They needed to move a mountain, and moving mountains was something he could do. Vulko, Izuku said, his mind already formulating a plan. Give me the precise coordinates of the temple's highest point. Mera, I need you to do something for me. Forget the air. Focus on the water you just collected. I don't need a lot of it, but I need you to make it solid. Hard water. As hard as you can make it. Though confused, she complied. The sphere of water in her hand compressed, solidified, and elongated, forming a crystalline, razor-sharp needle of hard water about a foot long. Izuku took it. He then walked to the spot Vulko had indicated on the map. He held the water needle like a javelin, aimed straight down. Stand back, he warned. He activated one for all. Not a full-body full cowling, but a focused channel of 30% power, just into his right arm. Green lightning crackled around him, his hair whipping up in the superheated air. He wasn't just going to throw the needle. He was going to use it as a kinetic penetrator, a projectile to start a shockwave. He thrust his arm down, a sharp, piston-like motion. The hard water needle shot into the sand and vanished. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a deep, resonant thump echoed from far below, the sound of the needle hitting solid rock. Okay, Izuku muttered to himself, analyzing the faint tremor that came back up through the soles of his boots. Deep. At least 200 feet of sand and soft rock. Now came phase 2. He took a wide stance, his feet sinking into the hot sand. He began to flick his fingers, not just one, but all of them, in a rapid, continuous motion. This was a technique born from his earliest, most reckless days, now refined into a tool of surgical precision. Delaware smash. Air Force. It wasn't a single, explosive blast. It was a controlled, sustained barrage of highly compressed air bullets. Each flick of his fingers sent a focused vortex of air screaming into the sand. It wasn't a shovel. It was a high-pressure hose, a mining laser made of pure wind. The sand erupted. A massive plume of gold and dust shot into the air as Izuku systematically blasted away layer after layer. It was a storm of his own making, a maelstrom of sand that blotted out the sun. Mera and Vulko shielded their eyes, watching in awe as the landscape was violently reshaped before them. The boy was not merely strong, he was a force of nature. He kept up the barrage for 10 minutes, his fingers a blur, his arm a conduit for incredible power. The air around him shimmered with heat and displaced energy. Finally, with a deep, grinding groan, his air bullets struck something that refused to yield. The sand cleared, revealing the top of a massive, sandstone archway, carved with the familiar, flowing runes of the old Atlantean language. They had found it. Izuku, panting, his body drenched in sweat, dropped his arm. Mera, your turn. Now, her role became clear. As Izuku continued to carefully blast away sand, Mera, with a renewed focus, began to draw water from the deep aquifer he had exposed. Streams of it rose from the excavation, which she then expertly wielded. She didn't use it to dig. She used it to solidify. She coated the newly exposed walls of the sand tunnel, using her hydrokinesis to turn the loose sand into a form of solid, stable sandstone. They were working in perfect, complementary tandem. He was the unstoppable force, she was the stabilizing control. Destruction and creation, working as one. Together, they carved a descending spiral staircase out of the desert itself, a testament to their combined power. After an hour of grueling work, they stood at the bottom, before a set of immense stone doors, the entrance to the forgotten temple. The air inside was cool, musty, and blessedly still. The light from their glowing Atlantean gauntlets cut through millennia of darkness, revealing a vast, silent chamber. The walls were covered in faded frescoes depicting a lost world, a vibrant kingdom surrounding a sparkling inland sea, with graceful Atlanteans swimming alongside strange, freshwater leviathans. It was a ghost of a civilization, a memory preserved in stone and dust. Incredible! Vulko whispered, his scholar's soul alight with wonder. He ran a hand over a series of runes. These tell the story of their decline, the great fall of Atlantis, the sundering of the continents. It cut them off. They chronicled their sea boiling away, year by year. They adapted, for a time, becoming a people of the desert, but they could not forget the water. Their technology, their very biology, was dependent on it. Their journey into the temple quickly became a treacherous ordeal. King Atlan, paranoid and brilliant, had not left his secrets unguarded. The deserters, in their final days, had activated the temple's ancient defenses, a final act of a dying people to protect their sacred history. Their first test came in the form of a great hall with a floor made of a perfect grid of massive stone tiles. Izuku's danger sense immediately began to hum, a low, constant warning. Pressure plates, he said instantly. A classic, indeed, Vulko agreed, examining the runes on the wall. But a devious one. The pattern is key to the constellation Draco as it appeared in the sky 10,000 years ago. One wrong step. He pointed to the ceiling, which was a jagged canopy of massive, precariously balanced stalactites. And the vibrations will bring it all down. Izuku looked at the complex star chart on the wall, then at the grid. His mind, trained to process vast amounts of data, began to map a path. I can get across. Float will help me balance on the right tiles, but you too. I will guide you, Princess, Vulko said to Mera. My memory of the ancient star charts is precise. It was slow, painstaking work. Vulko would point to a tile, and Mera, weakened but determined, would step onto it. Izuku moved ahead of them, a silent green phantom, his danger sense flaring whenever one of them put too much weight on a tile, allowing him to whisper a warning. They were halfway across when a section of the path collapsed, leaving a 15-foot gap. "There is no corresponding star for this section," Volko said, his brow furrowed. "The chart is incomplete." "It is a leap of faith." "No," Izuku said, shaking his head. "It's a leap of ingenuity." He turned to them. "Stay here." He activated Black Whip. 2 dark tendrils shot out, crossing the gap and anchoring firmly into the stone on the other side. A third, thicker tendril emerged from his back, weaving itself between the first 2, creating a taut, stable rope bridge. "Cross." Quickly and quietly, Mera and Volko stared, astonished. This boy was a constant source of surprises. They crossed the makeshift bridge, and once they were safe, Izuku dissolved the tendrils and cleared the gap with a single, silent leap. Their teamwork, born of necessity, was solidifying into a genuine, effective partnership. They navigated a maze of corridors where jets of superheated steam, the last vestiges of the temple's failing geothermal power, would erupt from the walls, forcing Mera to use her precious water to create temporary shields. They solved a complex riddle lock on a door, which required Volko's encyclopedic knowledge of old Atlantean dynasties. Finally, they reached the heart of the temple, a vast, circular chamber that housed the Great Forge. It was a colossal, silent thing, a testament to a lost age of technology. A massive anvil of obsidian dominated the center of the room, surrounded by dormant hydromechanical hammers and cooling channels that had once pulsed with frigid, deep-sea water. And guarding the anvil was the temple's final sentinel. It was a golem, 20 feet tall, forged from bronze and sandstone. Its form was that of an ancient Atlantean warrior, but its joints were crude, its movements stiff and grinding with age and disuse. Its single cyclopean eye, a large, dark crystal, began to glow with a malevolent red light as they entered. A low, grinding moan echoed through the chamber as the ancient automaton pushed itself to its feet, its stone fists the size of boulders. "A Praetorian automaton!" Volko gasped. "Powered by a synthetic heartstone. They were thought to be indestructible." The golem lumbered towards them, its steps shaking the very foundations of the temple. Mera immediately took a defensive stance, preparing to summon what little water she had left. But Izuku held up a hand. "Wait! Don't attack it! It is going to crush us!" she protested. "Just watch," he insisted. His eyes were narrowed, not in aggression, but in intense, focused analysis. He wasn't looking at the golem as an enemy. He was looking at it as a machine. "Movement is slow, predictable," he muttered under his breath, a habit he'd never quite kicked. "Right leg drags, indicating motor decay in the knee joint. Left arm has a slower response time. The power core in its chest is glowing, but it's flickering. Inconsistent energy output. It's ancient, running on fumes." The golem swung a massive fist. Izuku easily dodged, the blow pulverizing the spot where he'd been standing. He didn't counterattack. He just moved, a blur of green, forcing the golem to turn, to expend energy, to reveal its flaws. "Mera!" he called out, his plan forming. "Do you have enough water for one high-pressure jet? Aim for its right knee. There's a corroded plate on the back of the joint." Mera saw his strategy. He wasn't trying to beat it with brute force. He was dismantling it. She gathered her remaining strength, pulling the moisture from the air, from the deep stone, and formed a thin, powerful jet of water, as sharp as a blade. She fired it, and it struck the corroded plate on the golem's knee with pinpoint accuracy. The metal, already weakened by millennia of decay, hissed and then shattered. The golem's right leg locked up with a hideous grinding sound. It stumbled, its balance compromised. It roared in frustration, a synthesized, grating sound, and swung its left arm wildly. That was the opening Izuku needed. He launched himself forward, using a 15% full cowling. He leaped onto the golem's stumbling form, running up its torso as if it were a moving hill. He reached the flickering crystal in its chest, the synthetic heartstone. He drew back his fist, not for a smash, but for a precise, surgical strike. He tapped the crystal. Not with his knuckles, but with a single, extended finger, into which he channeled a tiny, sharp pulse of 1 for all. Just 1%. The effect was like flicking a switch. The crystal flared brightly for a second, then went dark. The red light in the golem's eye died. Its limbs went slack, and the colossal automaton froze in place, a statue once more, its fists raised in a final, impotent gesture. Izuku landed softly on the ground as Mera and Vulko stared, mouths agape. He hadn't destroyed the ancient guardian. He had simply turned it off. It was an act of such incredible control, such profound understanding, that it was far more impressive than any city-leveling smash. With the guardian disabled, their path to the anvil was clear. In the center of the obsidian anvil was a single, hand-shaped depression. Vulko examined it. It requires the touch of one with the royal blood of old Atlantis. The rulers of the Deserter Kingdom were a cadet branch of Atlan's line. His eyes fell on Mera. Mera stepped forward, her expression a mixture of reverence and apprehension. She placed her hand into the depression. It fit perfectly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, runes around the anvil began to glow with a soft, blue light. A low hum filled the chamber, and a cone of light shot up from the anvil, projecting a shimmering, three-dimensional image into the air above it. It was the image of a man. He was tall and regal, with a long, flowing white beard and hair. He wore the ancient armor of a king, but his face was not that of a proud conqueror. It was the face of a man burdened by immense wisdom and a deep, profound weariness. His eyes, even as a holographic projection, seemed to contain the depth of the entire ocean. This was Atlan, the first king. His voice, ancient and resonant, filled the chamber, the translation provided by Vulko's gauntlet rendering it into a language Izuku could understand. If you are seeing this, the hologram spoke, his voice a deep, calm baritone, then you have passed the first trials. You have shown ingenuity, teamwork, and the wisdom to overcome an obstacle without mindless destruction. You have proven yourself worthy of the path. He looked directly at them, or so it seemed, his gaze piercing and knowing. You seek my trident. You believe it to be a weapon, a scepter of power to claim a throne or win a war. You are wrong. The king's image gestured, and the scene around him changed. He showed images of Atlantis in its glory, but also in its folly, kings fighting kings, brothers betraying brothers, the same lust for power that had corrupted the surface world festering in the deep. I created the trident not to prolong this cycle, but to end it. Its power is not for conquest. It is for communion. To command the sea is to understand it. To speak with its creatures is to learn from them. The trident was meant to be a key, not a sword. A tool to unlock a greater understanding of our world, and our place within it. It was meant to be a bridge, to one day unite the sea and the land, to heal the world that was broken when we fell. The words struck Izuku with the force of a physical blow. A bridge. To unite. To heal. It was the echo of his own deepest desires, the very core of his heroic spirit, spoken by a king who had lived 10,000 years ago. He was not just chasing a weapon to stop a war. He was chasing an ideal, a philosophy that mirrored the very heart of One for All, a power meant to save and protect, not to rule and destroy. He felt an instant, profound kinship with this ghost of a king. Atlan's image looked down, a flicker of sadness in his holographic eyes. But my people were not ready. They saw only a weapon. So I hid it, where only a soul with the right intention could ever find it. Not the strongest warrior, not the most clever scholar, not the purest bloodline, but the truest heart. The image changed again, showing a terrifying, dark abyss teeming with monstrous, fanged creatures. Your path now leads you to the darkest corner of our world. To the kingdom of the trench. You must journey through their domain, a place where light has never touched and only hunger reigns. Beyond it, in an unseen abyss, lies a hidden sea, a pocket of the old world, preserved in time. There, the trident awaits its master. But it is not unguarded. A final image appeared, a creature of such immense, terrifying scale that it dwarfed even the golem. It was a leviathan of myth, its form wreathed in shadow, only its glowing, intelligent eyes visible. The Kara then, my oldest friend and my most trusted jailer, protects the trident. It cannot be fought. It cannot be tricked. It can only be answered. It will look into your heart, and judge your worth. If you are found wanting, it will devour you, as it has all the others who sought power for its own sake. The hologram of King Atlan began to fade, his voice a final, resonant whisper. Seek not a crown, but a burden. Seek not to rule, but to protect. Only then will you be worthy of the title. King. The light died, plunging the forge into darkness once more, leaving only the soft glow from their gauntlets. The three companions stood in silence, the weight of the king's words settling upon them. They had their clue. They knew where to go. But the path ahead was one of almost certain death. Volko was the first to speak, his voice filled with awe. The hidden sea, the caravan, these are legends I dismissed as children's fables. The trench is no fable, Mara said, her voice grim. She had seen the creatures from a distance on Zibelian patrols. They were a mindless, swarming horror. To cross their kingdom is suicide. They both looked at Izuku. He stood bathed in the faint green glow of his own internal power, his expression not one of fear, but of absolute, unshakable resolve. Atlan's message had not deterred him, it had galvanized him. It had given his impossible mission a meaning that transcended worlds. A king protects, Izuku said softly, repeating Atlan's final words. He looked at his companions, his eyes burning with the fire of a true hero. We have to try. Leaving the silent temple and its deactivated guardian behind, they began the arduous climb back to the surface. The desert sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. It was a sight of breathtaking beauty, a reminder of the world ORM sought to destroy, the world Atlan had dreamed of one day rejoining. Their quest was no longer just about stopping a war. It was about fulfilling a 10,000-year-old legacy. And as they boarded their skiff and plunged back into the welcoming embrace of the ocean, they set their course for the blackest depths, for a kingdom of nightmares, their hearts filled not with hope of victory, but with the grim determination to be worthy.